So, the papal bribe to the Portuguese English keeps growing. In this case, it was 5. But it's not keeping up. Last time, the bribe of 4 evened their value. This time, we're looking at the papacy's beginning to pull away. Their power is getting greater. They're making more and more money. They're disrupting trade nets and bringing more through Constantinople, which is where they're getting their cash. This may not be a feasible solution for the Brits. They were tempted to play the card, but here's the problem. There's this interesting balance with this whole thing. If they ever have enough money that they can take over the papacy, guaranteed, it may be worth it. But right now, over here, are Milanese who have nothing to lose by taking the papacy. They won't be giving up England if they do so. They're officially aligned with nothing right now. They actually have more cash and can do it. There's also kind of the question of how much is this actually worth? That's a different side to this. Because buying the papacy would be the long-term game. As opposed to, yeah, I'll be in a position to win right now. It also might be the ability to hunt down people who are your opposition. So if this guy is forbidden from the papacy and sitting in the middle of Constantinople, he could very quickly become a casualty. Others could as well. The papacy could be used to wipe out every single player. That's what was going to happen before that card came up. That's what's not able to happen right now. But the problem here is, I can play this. I don't have to worry about his cash. He can't buy the papacy. The only thing I have to worry about his cash is that he'll survive the game long enough that whatever he's got on hand is bigger than anyone else still, and he wins, and the game ends shortly. If the Brits buy it, if they don't have the cash to buy it, then they gain nothing from the card. So what they've got to kind of do is milk it for all it's worth, but they can't really crack down and say, okay, you know what? You're giving me more than last time, but it's still not enough. It's over. They just can't. Not unless they surpass everyone else at the table in terms of cash and are willing to pay that full amount that they're holding right then. I think it's worth it for a gamble if they're falling behind this guy. If they're managing to get their own lead somehow, well, then this guy's going to cut his payoffs. But yeah, so it puts them in an interesting situation where they definitely don't want to use the threat. That's often the case. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel where they may use the threat. And so this guy wants to make sure he's not giving enough of a bribe to make the Brits come in first place amongst all the others. And that's causing him a real problem. There are a couple of people who are up there in cash. We're going to have to really worry about the Comnenians because they have a lot of ability now with the power they have here. This guy's got a lot of money, but now that he's going to have to pay bribes on some of his connections to the Comnenians, it may not be so easy. Of course, the French Emperor is under siege. What the hell does that all mean? That's not going to combine empires in any sense. But if you can get rid of the Emperor, that puts him up for bid. Maybe I get that. And then I get the military power of the Habsburg. It's becoming very, very tangled and very hard to determine what the course is going to be. As we play it out, we get to see it. But that's one of the beauties of this game, is just this. There's so much going on and so many different paths that it can take. And it's not like when you sit down to play Pax Porfiriana, you don't have all these options on the board that determine what's going to happen. You may have a die roll on a card or this, that, and the other, but it just doesn't strike me as the same kind of puzzle to figure out. It's more distilled. And because it's more distilled, in some ways it's actually harder to see who's doing well. What you have to do is you have to hunt down all their cards, and they all have these little special abilities on it. Well, in this, you kind of can see it on the board. Where's my power? What's going on? What can I seize? What can I do? When you're playing the card version, you basically have to be aware of every card in the game. In this, you know, there's this visual representation that gives you a pretty good idea of what's going on. For me, that's the key. That's the key difference. Along with that visual representation sparks the thing that I play games for as well. I mean, which is the storyline, right? When I'm playing solo, the storyline becomes of absolute importance. If I'm playing opposed, the visual cue as to what the current status is important. I don't want to be hunting through everybody's set of cards. As we enter the taxes round, and we know that's not going to produce a lot of money, but the first card for the year I tossed away, and nobody bought any of the green cards, which was kind of weird, because almost immediately after I figured that out, I realized as I was building troops, wow, I really do need some of them. In particular, the Comnenid ended up this time buying the Dauphin because he built some troops here. Now, he doesn't have enough generalship to command all of those. That's the problem. So he kind of needs the Duke of Anjou as well, I believe, and he didn't get him. Burgundy and Burgundy's locked up in the siege. White Sheep is where he is. I've got a open bidding on another one of these. So yeah, he's willing to go to 2. This is his life or death, basically, here, as far as I see it. He went for 2. He also picked up the Angevin ruler of Sicily. Now, that guy's further away and is going to be harder to move up into position. But basically what I'm looking at is maybe trying to save the King of France here with troops that I can pick up along the way, even though they're from key locations. I kind of have to do what I can. And maybe the siege will last long enough. The Papal States were interested in buying someone because they built an army here and they have kind of this desire to wreck more caravans, but they're not really huge on that. If they were trying to wreck caravans, they would have picked up Lorraine. It was just basically oh yeah, same kind of thing. I built an army, now I have a goal in mind, and I don't really have enough people to wreck the caravans quickly enough. Now, this guy could come out and do a lot of damage. The Pope might be able to do some damage, but I have a limited number of leaders that I can access for this. Medici is going to be free. You know, I've got a decent amount of ability to do damage. It's just I wanted a little more, but it wasn't worth more than $1 to me. It was worth 2 to the Comnenid. This guy realizes the danger, but he's willing to pass on it. He doesn't see putting a high bid on these things. The English bought the card for the turn, in the summer turn, with the Leyden Press, which is going to show up here. Why? Well, if they get the Cape of Good Hope as their find, rather than the Caribbean, they get sugar and silk coming from out here, automatically. They can start changing the dynamics and make the world turn westward. And that's a very interesting factor. Out of the Mediterranean into more the Atlantic. It's more expensive to maintain. I'm going to have a hard time finding myself money for the English doing this. I could probably make money for myself by, you know, pushing some through Portugal or whatever, but I just am not getting a lot of cash for the English. In fact, the English have no cash, which means that I'm having to do the maturation out of my own pocket. This is really a Portuguese enterprise. Just kind of an interesting idea. All right, so we're on the taxes, and then it gets complex here because I've got so much shit on the things. But we've got a couple of things, the taxes and then the maturation. And then we get to do the big and very complex movement and combat, which it's just become this tangled web in the game recently because there's so much going on. Usually it's just a few moves, but now we're really in the constant military time. There's a difference between this and Lords of Sierra Madre. Lords of Sierra Madre, you get several military phases in a row. You get like up to infinite or maybe 30, depending on how you want to play it. Military moves in a row. You fight out a campaigning season, you know, in detail. Most turns don't have one, and every now and then when they do, your focus is entirely on that. This game requires that you keep your focus on everything at once, which makes it a little bit more complex, but it also keeps it from being static. The movement to do something is slow. It's on the scale of time that the rest of the game plods at. In Lords of Sierra Madre, a card determines essentially, hey, now I have enough troops to unbalance the situation, and then that unbalancing will take place over the course of the impulses. Because you really have enough time to do whatever you need to do during the combat phases, as long as people aren't just chasing each other around in a circle. And it's discovery time. The English have their fleet here. They have the Explorer. He's paid for. I roll a die. It's at -1 because of the Cartographer. I get a 1. I discover the Cape of Good Hope. Ships come back to Sea of Obscurity, and I get the rudder I wanted. Game's changed. How much? Don't know yet, because I've got to start funding this. But all the edifices get twice as much if they can ship to the Voyage of Discovery. Certainly anything to the west, anything that I can do this with is going to be worthwhile. I think what we're going to see is the French trying to build the trade route up. But they can't be in here. It's got to be an English ship there. It's an English ship that's going to produce the value. To maintain the trade there. So, as it happens, the English are going to try to take coastal areas here. The French are going to try. Everybody's going to try to make their money off this new route, because the old route was just spices, $3 per edifice. The new route is spices and sugar, and you're allowed to double up on that and take $6 per edifice from that. So this route becomes infinitely more valuable, and what we're going to probably see is routes tracing into Italy or whatever as well, either navally through here or in competition with the old Silk routes. Those Silk routes are just going to be useless essentially, because if you got to hook up a route, you want it to be this one. You could see the papacy, though, trying to dominate to prevent the English from getting into the Mediterranean, or the French from getting into the Mediterranean. That's going to be a potential point of contention, but with the power that the papacy has, they're not really too worried about it, to tell you the truth. And now we go to the summer move, and I need a break. My throat's killing me. It's nothing to do with this. I'm making a pot roast, and I took a broth out of it, and unfortunately there's a lot of pepper in the broth. My throat reacts poorly to pepper in liquid. Well, this was a pretty exciting movement phase. Things opened up with the French, actually, because they could just move a leader forward to grab troops on the way. Getting their 4 units in here to attack the, I don't know what to call him now, the Milanese, once allied with the Habsburgs, but they're no longer, and try to drive them away. But unfortunately, the Duke of Milan outranks anyone here, the Dauphin or the Duke of Anjou, and was able to drive them off with about equal losses. The siege of Salzburg didn't particularly do much for us. We're in a kind of losing position here, I think, with Milan, in the sense that that territory is we're not going to be able to maintain that siege. And if we can't maintain it, then we got to start trying to figure out some other way to survive here. Then, let's see, the Venetians marched forward and laid siege to the Komnenids. That doesn't look like a very promising avenue of attack. The Muscovite Tsar is running out of money. And in fact, that whole eastern route is drying up, which we'll see in a moment, because the English and the papacy hooked things up here. Now, because each of these probably produces two goods, a sugar and a spice, right? That's what he gets out of this. Or a sugar and a silk. Oh, no, silk and spice. So that's interesting. It's not a sugar. There's no sugar yet. So that's kind of opening up routes, but not necessarily improved routes. In fact, they're weaker routes because the papacy, I was mistaken. I thought we were getting what the edifices need, which is a sugar and a spice. No, we're just getting spice or silk. Silk's what the banks need, spice is what other things need. So yeah, there's an alternate route, but it's not very appealing for anyone. At this point, I have to figure out how to get that Habsburg French allied route set up so that at least they get their materials as far as Paris, but also can they get that overland route? Well, currently the Venetians have it blocked. So there's kind of a you deal with the Pope or you don't get out of here situation right now. This one doesn't really help the English yet. They're going to have to build their own route for that to work, because a shared route with the papacy, well, they're each going to demand their bribe. The papacy is not going to deliver for free, and there's no real advantage to them to cutting out Constantinople anyway, so they may just deny this route unless it's particularly advantageous to them. For example, the English may wish to use this route instead of pumping more money through the papacy. After the trade, some interesting things kind of show up. First of all, this doesn't do much of anything. Again, only the Brits got it. But the Komnenid were getting lots and lots of money here. Meanwhile, in a sense, the papacy's been kind of negotiating with the Venetians to attack the Komnenid. And after I had allocated most of the trade and it was too late to try to go back, the Venetians said, wait a minute, why are you running this through here? I want you to run it down this way for me. I don't want you helping them. I don't want you making it any easier for him to get troops and refurbish them. And that's a pretty reasonable argument, actually. So this may be the last turn of the Komnenid wealth. They've been stockpiling quite a bit as the source of slaves, which go, of course, to their enemy, Milan, but they've got to probably come to some sort of agreement there because, you know, neither one's the leader. Here's the leader. That's a 50. And nobody's got that kind of cash on hand. That's 30 over there for the Komnenids. We got quite a bit here, too. People are pulling good money in, there's no question. But it's not doing as much as you need at this point. You need to match this. And there's quite a clamor for put it up for bid, destroy this empire. Well, the problem is the Brits don't have enough money to win it. Comnenid have the next highest amount. They might not want it. They have their own good empire. Throwing that away to bid doesn't necessarily make a great deal of sense. But actually, this is an equal amount. In which case, Britain's not going to walk away with the advantage out of this. It's going to go to, or Portugal. It's going to go to Milan here, or Milan, and then they would become the same kind of money-making power, equally opposed to any kind of land routes, with no check on them. At least as things stand right now, money's being shifted from here into Portugal's hands. And conceivably, I can build an alternative route here. One that the papacy can't really intervene with without that threat being thrown on them. So there's a degree of worry with any action there. All right. Okay, as we wind up the 1470 turn, there were a few attacks. Notably, the Pope laid siege to the French king, and this is perhaps violating England's objectives here. He doesn't want to see the papacy get any bigger. I'm not quite sure why the Pope is interested in doing this. He probably would have been better off going for the Duke of Milan. That would have been more acceptable. I'm blaming it on vodka and chocolate milk, to tell you the truth. But this is the potential end of the game. We've got Venice continuing their siege of the Comnenids up here as well. That's running low on money. Basically, the French troops were able to push the Duke of Milan out. He's down to just one unit. They weren't able to win the battle with their relief force, but I withdrew because it was just getting too dangerous. It was clear additional forces would come from France. I just don't see how the Habsburgs can keep that up. But the Pope launching an attack on the French king is a very dangerous thing, because if he captures the French king, then the French military is pretty much neutralized, and then he can march up and conquer France. And that is the end of everything but England. That would make this card, which one? This card, far more potent, because it can just disassociate him. So at this point, if he doesn't get a spy on the next draw, we're not going to see much. The draw this time was Saxon Tin Mine, which the Comnenid player took because, hey, I've got the Habsburg Empire. Game does not end, which would have been a possible argument for why to launch that attack. The Brits are probably going to lodge their opposition, and I'm guessing the Pope's going to pull out of there. He doesn't want to push the issue too far. All right, we're in kind of weird position here. Remember, most of the powers don't have a lot of money. Even this French-Habsburg combination, only the papacy has just hordes of cash, and they're not using much of it. They've got the routes set up. Mainly they're using it for enforcement under the approval of England. They pretty much agreed, all right, I'll go wipe out the Habsburg, the Milanese lord and his little army. And as he heard word of this, he built it up as big as he kind of could afford to without dipping too deeply into his money. He used some of the NPC money, building NPC troops. He also used his own. Notably, the English don't want to use, or the Portuguese don't want to use their money to build English ships, even though they need to make England a powerful empire, in part because, the card they have says, someday I may be the papacy. I don't want to make England the power. What I want to do is make myself wealthy, but that's hard to do. The only real goal, the only real way he has of doing that is by influencing, say, the Pope, who gave him $7 this turn, by the way, but you can see he's still hoarding up the cash, to agree, okay, I will go after this, and I'm going to pursue the Comnenids, who also are up there in the bids, in the ability to bid on the papacy. through Venice. Venice is my kind of client state in this case. The Mamluks, who are way up here, have managed to build themselves a force as well. So now they're less just running around trying to grab cash where it's lying around, and may actually try to put some influence in the game. The problem is they're much weaker than the other things that are up here. And they can't really obviously undertake any kind of attack on the papacy and its power here. The French built a round ship with the hopes of getting transportation to Portugal and then maybe moving some of their caravans, they built up some of them, so that they can actually not work from this direction where the Comnenad himself is, and instead worry more about trying to get the English goods and pay money to the English player. But that may be defeating their goals. The problem here is we're in this weird sort of balance where the Florentine prince, who controls the papacy, has a lock on so much that he's getting all the trade revenue. Other people, like the French, the Milanese, but they're unable to really create bids on these. Basically, the feeling is France is willing to say, look, if you've already funded something, I'm not going to take it from you. I'm not going to invest my effort in that, especially when we're busy fighting a war. So we both make money off of producing, out of keeping it online. The Comnenad player isn't losing cash off that war, while the Milanese is. If he just accepts the status quo, it'll all be fine, We'll worry about the papacy then. That might be the best move for them. The problem is the papacy is just so strong that nobody can take it down. So there's kind of this feeling of, well, okay, if I link up the English and get them in on this, and can move the trade this way, it's got to go. My caravans have to go as far as Transylvania. That won't be a problem. And of course, the English will use their trump card to try to prevent the papacy from interfering with the trade over here. But they're not going to interfere with the trade over there. That doesn't help them. They want two routes, them and the bunny. So that they can then trump in. And they've got this certain power that they're able to exert over the papacy via that one card that they have. Anyway, we're getting to the spring naval moves. I'm not quite sure what the hell to do with these. Everything that I look at seems kind of pointless, so we'll probably pass on that and move onward to the summer card. Spring card was another one of these mines. We've got a couple of Habsburg-based mines. The Ultraquist Party. Hussites. It's going to be Bohemia. All right. Having trouble finding Bohemia here. Oh, there it is. All right, that's not going to be too much, but it is another leader. If somebody wants to buy a $1 leader, that might be worthwhile. The papacy has some interest in additional leaders. Most other players probably don't really need them. And a 1 point doesn't look terribly valuable. Portugal has an interest maybe in boosting his reputation overall, but this doesn't look like a good fit for that. Looks to me like we're on the summer taxes. There's not going to be much there. I'll just come back after the next movement. Milan's been largely put out of the game. He's been captured. No, he's been killed. He's been reduced, and he's sitting over here. French could actually wipe him out here, but we're too weak. Get my French moving. Now we got a shot. Let's take that shot. We get one die on a 1, 2, or 3. We capture him. Nope. All right, well, that's okay. Um, he's lost everything except his economic holdings. He's no longer really a player in this game except insofar as he can cut deals with people. And that's going to be costing him every buck he makes, basically. He's going to cost $1 to the papacy and $1 to the Comnenid. This is terrible for the English. At best, they're going to get half of what the papacy gets. But such is life. That's where we were before. And that was a battle that came out here. The French are unable, they don't have enough caravans to keep things hooked up cutting through Spain. The English don't have quite enough, they don't have enough ships to launch a route coming through, say, here. We need a couple more ships. The French would be willing to supply them if the English can guarantee their safety through the papacy. I'm not sure the papacy is willing to allow anyone into the Mediterranean. I think that kind of, at some point or another, they have to draw a line and say, look, you want to try to establish another route, go ahead, but you're not doing it through here. And meanwhile, they'll probably continue hunting things down. At this point, we have a couple of missing cards. Lord of Wallachia, who happens to be sitting in his prison. And these guys don't have a replacement, so when they die, they just go away, which is something we had with the Teutonic Knights there. We have a diplomat available. We have a couple of these. The Augsburg Bank, the Angevin ruler of Hungary, the Borgia. They've all been released because the Habsburg, the Milanese lord is gone. Now, he's on his last incarnation. He gets a bonus 3. Wipe him out, and this money is no longer really an issue. It probably goes to an empire or something, unless somebody can cleverly do it. For example, if Portugal could have snuck up and done it. But, you know, Burgundy doing it wouldn't give any help at all. It would give a big pile of money to Burgundy to build mercenaries, which he could build a couple with. Can't build more than that because his stature is only 2. Let's look at what today's card is. A guild strike. You can put a guild up for rebidding. There's only one guild in the game, I think, which is the Textile Guild here. Oh no, the Foundry is also a guild. So that would be kind of an interesting way to try to pull that out of Milan's hands. The problem is, it's really hard to threaten him with anything other than death at this point. He's not really willing to give up what little economic power he has. That economic power has been what's keeping him close in the game. And I'm just not convinced that the Comnenid, as an example, are willing to take that away from him. The English would be willing to take it away and try to put that up for rebidding, maybe. Clean some money out of someone. They need to get money out of people's hands right away. And right now, they have more coins. They have more coins. Either one could become the papacy instead of them, which in particular would suck over here. However, Milan might be easier to die through maybe just a random event or something, and then he'd just be out of the game. Easier than the Florentine prince, who still has an heir available and has a wife. So he's going to be harder to knock out. Let's see where the bidding goes on this, if anybody's really willing to put a lot in. Something you got to be kind of tricky about or careful about in terms of declaring trade routes. So if you agree on a deal, hey, my caravans are available to you, you have to give them all of them to use. In the case of, say, the papacy deciding my ships are available to you, that meant the English, who have been using this route, and the French allow them to use it for free, and have actually been agreeing to deposit here rather than give the papacy more money. Now, they hadn't been always, have you have this situation where if the papacy says, okay, France, you can use my shipping and my caravans, well, France declared a trade route up through here. Not entirely in the spirit of things, but to some extent they argued their case to the papacy as to, look, you know, I'm just tired of pouring all this money into you. If you want to bring it, go ahead. But we now have another route and it brings you less money. And just because I don't have it all hooked up yet doesn't mean I'm not going to use it. You don't want it? Pull your ships out of there and it won't work anymore. But you got your ships set up there. Obviously, you're encouraging that trade route, right? Okay. These trades also involve, just so that I don't have to worry too much, in a lot of cases, so for example, I'm shipping through Constantinople, but there might be a way around that. I'm allowing the owner of the territory to more or less dictate which path it's going to be. If he owns the territory and he owns the means of transport, it's just too hard to, at least solitaire, try to figure out all the aspects of the trade routes that could end up devolving. Things like this that could end up managing someone to avoid Constantinople for a turn. And then everybody would do that. And then, of course, the trade route would shift. Some of the caravans would move or something to prevent that from ever happening again. So to some extent, it's kind of a negotiated factor, but I'm not going into the detail on that maybe would happen in an opposed game. And that has happened earlier in this game and in other games that I played of it, but it's beginning to get to that period where it's tough to spend all that effort on each turn. So much money coming in. Time to make change again, because pennies ain't doing it. Habsburgs hunted down a couple more the papacy hunted down a couple more caravans, wiped them out. Just trying to ensure you will use my route. I found something interesting though. There's another source of slaves down here in Africa. I thought there was a source here, but there's not the equivalent of what's up there. There's not one here. There's only one in the Crimea. But this is the second source. Now these, I don't believe there's cards to allow you to use slaves. I believe they're always available. Not positive, but the interesting reason that this came up was I saw an loom farm. This is down here in Murcia. It's an interesting location that it's not clear who owns it and who can make advantage of it. There's no city attached to it, which means we'd have to get caravans down there. It kind of skews the whole thing. It would need slaves, and this is actually the closest source, but this is the most reasonable one right now, whatever that means. If there's a Western shift to the world, this might actually end up being a valid possibility, but that's going to take a long time to undertake. As we've seen with England and France, France is making decent money, but with England not making any money, and never going to, right? Until the Portuguese fund them, they're not going to be a real empire the way that these others are, because they don't have the traffic routes going through them that produce money. So unless they start taking over the Mediterranean, the Atlantic coastline, they can't make money off of supporting the Atlantic coastline except whatever they get in bribes, which of course goes to the player. Not really helpful to the English Empire. He would really love to make that switch. So he's looking at his coins again. 6 coins. He's still outbid. You know, and if you bid all your money at this stage in the game, when it's possible the game might end, you might be coming in last, behind even people who aren't doing much of anything. Just kind of living as bottom feeders here. So, I don't know how valuable this sucker is. It wouldn't be too terribly hard, a couple of caravans, to link it up to the papal side of things. Getting here would require Yeah, another 3 caravans with moving out during the winter into a city. Or a longer route to get me up to here where there's a port, or if somebody puts a ship down here, a shorter route. But that's a tough thing, because that would be the only reason for that, is to hook up that slavery, unless this mine comes into play. And this may count as a mine. I know there's special instance about Guinea, but I thought it was just in the notes for the game. Like all Eklund games, it's not always clear what's going on until you've played around with it a while. And for me, I don't know if there's a card there. I've never seen one, so. But it could. Maybe it's come up in one game and I've just thrown it out because geez, that's useless. But there is some value to this. The only question is how much. And if this comes into play, then there's value to getting that up to here. This guild that Milan set up, and there's been no way to support it. Well, finally there's an alum source. I don't know. I don't know how much it's worth. I don't know if it's worth diddly to anyone, to tell you the truth. The English, they're passing on it. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a pass, although it could end up being a valuable thing if it got hooked up. There's just the feeling that there's not enough time. Now, we also have a bunch of dead lords or dying lords. Some of them are stuck places. So like the Duke of Genoa here, he might be of some value to the Habsburg, or to the papacy, but not to anyone else. And he doesn't really want them right now. He's not going all out. Hungary hasn't collected up enough money yet. He'd be a target for arrest. And the Hansa here, kind of out of the line, unless some cash shows up on his way, which seems very unlikely. That doesn't seem terribly valuable, unless somebody like Portugal wants to get a raise. I'm going to just push into winter depletions. I'm going to send this one up at this point. Make something of a lie of that. I had one thing I wanted to note. The Muscovite troops here under Venice's command, they've just pretty much dissolved. He's down to 1 depleted unit. He can't keep doing this for the papacy. And the deal he's been getting out of the papacy is more or less, yeah, I'll let you live and treat you fairly like I would anyone else. It's just not worth it. It really isn't. Maybe this is papal money that I haven't put into place. So, that way you get to see if I can end this. 11 or 12 still. No. Alrighty. Yes, it's getting kind of tiresome. Part of me kind of wants to just clean it up because I feel like I've shown most of what's happening, and now what else is there to the game? I mean, there is who wins, but that becomes kind of this weird sort of, does something happen to break the papacy and his control before the game ends? Because he's constantly getting more cash than everyone else. Yes, he's giving it away to the English, but not until after this die roll. But who knows? Let's send